Hey everybody, welcome to the video. So we're going to go over the 11-game MLB DFS slate over on Draftkings. And I gotta say, I'm looking forward to the slate a lot more than I was yesterday's. Not a big fan at all of the small, especially 2-game slates. I'm not even a fan of 3-game slates or 4-game slates for the most part, but 2 games is just pretty rough, especially with Kershaw getting scratched. That just threw a wrench into the entire slate. So much more looking forward to this slate. 11 games, lots of good pitching options, lots of good options on offense, lots of good stacks. So should be pretty fun. But before we continue, as always, if you guys could just leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, you might as well hit that subscribe button. It's going to be here all season long trying to help you guys become better MLB DFS players. They cover other sports as well. We have NBA coming back very soon. There's NASCAR on currently. And we have the NFL in the fall. So there's a lot to look forward to. It's going to be a busy time, but it's also going to be a fun time. So if you're going to come back to the channel each and every single day or every single week, you might as well hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss out whenever I post new content. You can also follow me on Twitter. I'm at ChrisPennell16. You can follow me on IG at CPenn16. And if you want some more content over on Patreon, feel free to do so. Links in the description below. You get access to all the extra content. We got over 330 members now. Pretty darn cool. So I do appreciate each and every single one of you guys over on Patreon. If you're interested, hit the link description below. If you're not, that's fine. Let's just get into today's slate. And as always, we'll start with pitching. Now, my first thoughts on pitching is that I'm probably going to spend up. I'm not a fan of any of the value options, nor am I a fan of any of the mid-range options for the most part. So I feel pretty comfortable with the spend up options. And there's actually plenty of value hitters on this slate to get it done. So it's not really going to be like you're hunting for value and your lineups aren't going to look too good. You can pretty easily fit these guys in. So my plan is to spend up as of right now. I know spending up for pitching might not sound like the best idea, especially with these guys not fully stretched out yet, but it's just, I think these guys have the safest floors, and it's what I feel comfortable with. So we'll start with Justin Verlander. I mean, he was one of the best pitchers in the league last year, and he makes a ton of sense. I know he's really expensive, but his upside's the highest on the entire slate. And I mean, there's no getting around it. His numbers are absolutely elite. One of the best pitchers in the entire league. 3.18 xFIP last season, 35% strikeout rate. He did have a little bit of a power problem sometimes. He did give up a 180 ISO versus lefties, but he still had a 38% strikeout rate versus them, and he gave up a near 200 ISO versus righties. So home runs were a little bit of a problem with Verlander last year, 1.45 home runs per 9 innings. But still, the strikeout rate is what's going to get me here. Now, the Mariners did have some pop versus right-handed pitching last season, a near 200 ISO versus them, which does give me a little bit worries. Verlander might give up a solo shot or two, but they still have a 25.7% strikeout rate versus righties, which I believe was top 5 in the entire league. So the strikeout rate, or the strikeout upside for Verlander in this matchup versus the Mariners, it's pretty high in my opinion. We could see double-digit Ks. I think in Vegas right now he's at 8 over-under for his strikeout odds, which I think he could hit the over there, and obviously the Vegas odds are going to check out for Verlander. Lowest implied team total in the slate versus him at 2.94, 73% chance of a win, and the numbers are downright elite for Verlander. Is he expensive? Yes, but I still think he's the best pitching option on this slate. If you want to save some salary with Shane Bieber, I understand that. Now, I would not be playing Shane Bieber and Justin Verlander together. I have not tried to build lineups yet, but I don't think it would make too much sense to spend nearly $22,000 on pitching. I don't typically like to go above $20,000. There's some slates where I'm willing to do it, and I think I'm willing to do it on this slate because if I play Verlander and Aaron Nola or Jack Flaherty, I think we're just above $20,000. So, I mean, it's fine because there's a lot of value options on this slate, but typically I don't want to go to $22,000. So, if I'm picking an SP1, I think you have to go with either Verlander or Shane Bieber. Then you have to, as your SP2, I don't think you can use one of those two guys. I think you have to drop down to at least Aaron Nola or Jack Flaherty. If you have some mid-range options you like, you can do it, but I just don't feel comfortable with them. But anyway, sticking with Shane Bieber, he's one of the favorites to win the AL Cy Young Award this year, and he's just one of the more consistent pitchers in the entire league. Now, his strikeout rate's not up there with the guys like Verlander, Cole, or Max Scherzer, but the guy's got excellent control, only a 5% walk rate. Now, the one thing with Shane Bieber is that he will struggle with lefties, but the lefties in the Royals lineup don't scare me too much. Now, Mondesi and Alex Gordon are really the only two guys that concern me too much. I'm not that concerned with Franchi Cordero and Nicky Lopez, but Mondesi could give him some trouble. Shane Bieber had a 186 ISO given up to lefties last season, but overall, the guy's got excellent control. And I think there's a good chance he gets the win here. The Indians are one of my favorite stacks on the slate. Vegas odds are working in his favor. Now, if you're looking at the Royals numbers versus righties last season, They didn't strike out very much at all, 22% strikeout rate, but only a 157 ISO, 304 WOBA, and an 86 WRC plus, which is actually one of the lowest in the entire league. So it's a pretty soft matchup for Bieber here, and I do think he's a nice pivot off of Verlander if you want to save over $1,000. I think he's fine as your SP1 on this slate. If you want to go with Aaron Nola, he's got that really soft matchup versus Miami, which I think a lot of people will flock to Nola just because everyone likes picking on Miami. We know they have one of the worst lineups in the entire league. And pretty much last year, whenever you had a pitcher versus Miami, they were always decently owned because it's just a really soft matchup. If you're looking at their numbers versus right-handed pitching last season, they had a 25.10% strikeout rate, 124 team ISO, 283 WOBA, only a 75 WRC plus. This is a very soft matchup for Aaron Nola. If you're looking at his numbers, last season he had 3.82 xFIP. Now I know his numbers are red, but I only have 4 players listed here, and it's formatted to have the best numbers green, worst numbers red. If you put this in a bigger player pool, if you're looking at the entire player pool, his numbers are good. They're not. This is not bad. 3.82 xFIP is not bad. Is it worse than Verlander and Bieber? Yes, but those are some of the best pitchers in the league. He had a 27% strikeout rate, which is excellent, even though it is red here. 9% walk rate, but he got a lot of ground balls, 49.7%. Didn't get much. The balls didn't get hit in the air too much against Aaron Nola. Only a 29.5% fly ball rate. Didn't allow much hard contact whatsoever. So I think Aaron Nola is an excellent SP2 option, or if you want to make him your SP1, I think that's fine. Very soft matchup versus Miami. Only 3.59 runs implied against him. 64% chance for a win. 6.5 strikeouts over under in Vegas. So I do like Aaron Nola. I think he's an excellent option. And I also like Jack Flaherty. He's 9,000, and he was on an absolute tear at the end of the year last season. And I was playing him quite a bit, and it was working out a lot. Now, the matchup versus Pittsburgh, it's not my favorite. Now, it's not like they have like a ton of power versus righties, but man, they just did not strike out versus them at all. I think they actually had the second best K rate in the entire league versus right-handed pitching last season. If we're going to look at their splits versus righties, they had a 99 WRC plus, which is not that great, but at 324 WOBA, 168 ISO, but only at 18.9% strikeout rate. That's actually pretty darn solid. I did prefer using lefties versus Pittsburgh last season, but Jack Flaherty, I feel like he should have his way with his lineup. I mean, his numbers were excellent last season if you're looking at his overall stats. 2.75 ERA, 3.64 xFIP, but a 30% strikeout rate, 7% walk rate. Did not give up a lot of hard contact at all at 37.6%. I think he is a pretty darn good option. 7 strikeouts in Vegas. I mean, these is pretty much my top 4 pitchers on the slate. Verlander, Bieber, Nola, Flaherty. I think most likely I'll end up paying up for either Verlander or Bieber than using my SP2 as Nola or Flaherty. But if I want to fit some more bats in my lineup, I don't hate the idea of going Nola Flaherty, but I'm more than likely going to stick with this player pool. I just can't see myself really getting to any of the other mid-range options. So that's kind of what I'm looking at pitchers. I think we can move on to the bats now at this point. Alright, again, if you're new to the channel, what I like to do is pick a couple of guys from each position, then we'll work our way down. So we start with the catcher first and then etc. So up top, I think Christian Vasquez is arguably the best option at catcher. I mean, the Red Sox are arguably the best stack in the entire slate. They're going up against a lefty, and Boston, for the most part, hits lefties very, very well. And they have one of the highest implied team totals on the slate at nearly 6. I think it actually is the highest. Now the Astros are up there, and as well as the Dodgers, but yeah, I'm pretty sure Boston has the top spot, and I agree with that. I think they should have their way with the Orioles. We know the Orioles bullpen's also pretty rough, and Christian Vasquez, he hit lefties very well. They're going up against lefty Tommy Milone. And Malone's got a pretty good strikeout rate versus lefties. He gives up more power to lefties with a 296 ISO compared to a 221 ISO versus righties. But if you're looking at Christian Vasquez's numbers versus lefties last season, he hit them very well. 272 ISO, 365 WOBA, 124 WRC plus, 557 slugging. I think he's a pretty solid option. If you're spending up a catcher, which not my most favorite thing to do, but if you want to complete a Boston stack, I think Vasquez is a pretty good option. Going down to Roberto Perez, I like the Cleveland Indians stack today, which, again, if you guys are new to the channel, I pretty much like stacking the Indians most slates because I'm a big Indians fan, but hey, it works out quite I mean, they have some pretty good options. Francisco Lindor, Famo Reyes, Jose Ramirez, they got some good options. They definitely have some power in the lineup, and Roberto Perez, he was pretty darn good versus lefties last season. If you're looking at his splits, he had a 240 ISO, 360 WOBA, 122 WRC plus. If you're looking at Duffy's numbers versus righties last season, he had a 318 WOBA versus them, 190 ISO, only a 20% strikeout rate, had a high walk rate versus them, so I do think Roberto Perez is actually a pretty solid option. Again, I'm not a big fan of spending up for a catcher. I prefer punting most slates, and especially if I'm spending up for pitching, I tend to punt catcher because I don't really want to punt many other positions. So I could see myself going with Rob Brantley here. He is the min price, and he is projected to start here in that 8th in the batting order. He's going to be hitting low, but there's nothing I can really say good about him other than the fact he is absolutely free, and he should get a lefty on righty matchup, and if he gets a walk or even a hit, I will be very happy. Even if he gets 0, I'm just assuming the rest of my lineup does well, hopefully. So Rob Brantley is my punt catcher of the day, and I have no problem just plugging him in and spending up a pitching and get some other good hitters in my lineup. So going down to first base, we have Carlos Santana. Now, I prefer him when he's facing a righty, but I really like the Indians stack today, and he's projected to bat cleanup. And if I'm stacking the Indians, I probably don't want to leave out the guy that's batting cleanup. So I do like Carlos Santana here. I mean, I just think the Indians have their way with Duffy. He's just not that great of a pitcher. We know the Royals bullpen's not that great either. And there's a reason they have one of the highest implied team totals on the slate. So I do like Carlos Santana quite a bit. Max Muncy, he was just extremely high on last night. Again, 2-game slate, which is one of the reasons I hate 2-game slates, because Max Muncy was like over 80% owned. I mean, that's just absolutely insane. You're not even going to come close to that today, I don't think. Maybe, but JD Martinez, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But Max Muncy should be leading off here versus Jeff Samardzija, who does struggle versus left-handed bats. And he was actually pretty tough on righties last season. He gave up a 151 ISO versus them, only a 264 WOBA. But when you go to lefties, he gave up a 221 ISO and a 313 WOBA. Less than 20 strikeout rate and an 8.47 walk rate. And Muncy's numbers versus right-handed pitching are just pretty incredible. 267 ISO, 372 WOBA, 134 WRC plus. This Dodgers lineup hits righties very, very well. One of the best teams in the league versus right-handed pitching. Tons of good lefties on that team. So as long as Max Muncy's leading off again, which he should, I think he's an excellent option at 4,500. I also like the Astros. The Astros, the Dodgers, the Indians, the Red Sox are pretty much some of the best stacks on the slate. There's also some other good secondary stacks, but definitely like the Astros versus a lefty. I like the Dodgers versus a righty, the Indians versus Danny Duffy, and then obviously the Red Sox versus Tommy Milone, which I think they should definitely have their way with them. But yeah, I do like Yuli Gurriel here. The price is nice. I like that he's in the heart of the order, projected to hit anyway, and he's pretty good versus left-handed pitching. If you look at his splits from last year, he had a 241 ISO, 334 WOBA, 112 WRC plus, and an extremely, extremely low 6.8 strikeout rate. So he made a ton of contact versus left-handed pitching last season. Now he's actually a bit reverse splitsy, where he's got better numbers versus righties overall. 244 ISO, 376 WOBA, 140 WRC plus, a little bit higher of a strikeout rate, but I still think Yuli Gurriel's fine here. He's hitting in the heart of the order on a good lineup. I know we're all not fans of the Astros, I'm assuming from the cheating scandal, but there's still going to be a good offense, so I do like Yuli Gurriel. Then Michael Chavis, he's 3,000, and I expect him to be one of the highest owned players on the entire slate. I mean, it just makes no sense at all to fade him, especially if he's hitting in the heart of the order. He's projected to bat 5th as of right now, and he's on arguably the best offense in the entire slate heading into the slate, to be honest. I mean, they have a 6 implied team total, and that's the highest on the slate, and he just makes a lot of sense because that Red Sox lineup should do some damage versus Tommy Milone, and we get a cheap righty on lefty matchup here at only 3,000. I mean, the price is just way, way low. And if we look at his numbers versus lefties last season, he had 255 ISO, 85 WRC plus, which isn't great, but his splits are definitely much better versus lefties. So I do like Michael Chavis here. They should have their way with Tommy Milone. Honestly, the best stack on the slate, and you're getting him at a really cheap price point. I expect him to be heavy chalk as long as he's hitting in the middle of the order. Now we have to second base. We have Jose Altuve. He comes in at 5,000, and a lot of these Astros are really good versus lefties, and that includes Jose Altuve. If you're looking at his numbers versus lefties, 346 ISO, 429 WOBA, 176 WRC plus, 677 slugging. I mean, he's really expensive, but if you're stacking the Astros, I'm not sure how you can really leave Jose Altuve off. And going up against Marco Gonzalez, who is not the best pitcher in the world. Now, he has some decent numbers versus righties, comparative to what he gives up to lefties, where he's actually giving up a lower ISO to righties than he is lefties. He has a 176 ISO given up to lefties compared to 151 to righties. So a little bit reverse splitsy there, but I think the Astros hitters are just too good. They should be able to overpower Tommy Milone, I apologize, Marco Gonzalez. He's a soft tossing lefty, so I think they're going to be fine. If you're stacking the Astros, you can't really leave Jose Altuve off. Rougned Odor, he's 4,100. He's always a bit of a risky guy, and it's not like this Texas ballpark is going to hit like it did last season. Last year in the summer at Texas, it was like Stack City. It was like basically a mini course field there. I mean, I pretty much was playing Joey Gallo, Rougned Odor, Nomar Mazara at pretty much every single slate when they were at home in the summer because the ball just absolutely flew. Unfortunately, that won't be the case anymore, but I still like the lefties here versus Marquez. Marquez is pretty tough on righties, but if you look at his splits versus lefties, he's giving up a 216 ISO versus them, 328 WOBA, 20% strikeout rate. Now, if you look at his numbers versus righties, he's got a 28% strikeout rate, only a 149 ISO given up. So he's much tougher on righties, but the lefties can get to him, so I don't mind Odor here. I do like the lefties in this lineup. And then moving down to Cesar Hernandez, he's 3,800. Now, I prefer him versus righties, but he should be leading off here for Cleveland, and they're one of my favorite stacks on the entire slate. And he's only 3,800. I really don't want to leave the leadoff guy for one of my favorite stacks that I'm playing. So if you're going to be playing the Indian stack, you're getting a pretty cheap Hernandez here. Now, his numbers versus righties are much better if you want to look at his splits. Numbers versus righties, Hernandez is at a 342 on-base percentage, 330 WOBA, 102 WRC+, 152 ISO. Compare that to lefties, the numbers 0.070 ISO, 277 WOBA, 67 WRC+, and a 57.62% ground ball rate. Don't love his numbers versus lefties, but I'm not that scared of Duffy, and again, I don't really want to leave the leadoff guy on my top stacks, so I do have some interest in Hernandez, despite him having some pretty awful splits versus lefties. Then Jose Peraza. If you want cheap Red Sox exposure, you get a cheap righty on lefty matchup here. Peraza's not that great of a hitter at all, but he's still cheap enough to where he has interest because he is on one of the best stacks in the entire slate. Going down to third base, we have Alex Bregman, who is one of the best hitters in the entire league versus left-handed pitching. If you look at his splits versus them, he's got a 473 WOBA, 393 ISO, 205 WRC+. He has amazing numbers versus lefties. Again, I know we're all not fans of the Astros, but they're still going to be able to hit lefties well. They're still going to be able to hit righties well. I mean, they're going to be fine either way. So I do like Alex Bregman. The guy just absolutely smashes left-handed pitching. Jose Ramirez, just keeping on with that Indian stack. He should be batting really high in the order. And he's one of the best batters in the entire league. Now, I do prefer him versus right-handed pitching, as I pretty much prefer the entire Indians roster versus right-handed pitching, besides a few guys. But J-Ram's the guy who's always a high-contact guy. He does not strike out a lot. He always puts the ball in play, and that's really all I can ask for from a hitter is just give me a chance and put the ball in play. One thing I will say about J-Ram is that he's a very streaky hitter. He can go on big cold streaks, or he can go on just major hot streaks where he looks like the best player in the league. So hopefully he doesn't start out the season cold, but I still like J-Ram here. I mean, I like the Indian stack, so it would make sense to not like J-Ram. He's very expensive, so I'm only playing him in stacks. I wouldn't play him as a one-off, but I still think he's fine. Manny Machado, we're getting a decent price on him, and he's actually very good versus left-handed pitching. Now, he's going up against Madison Bumgarner, which is not my favorite guy to target ever, but he's not I wouldn't say like a top-level elite kind of pitcher these days. But yeah, just looking at Machado's numbers versus lefties, I mean, they're some of the best in the league. 370 ISO, 441 WOBA, 177 WRC+, a really high slugging percentage. If you look at Bumgarner's splits versus lefties and righties, Bumgarner is very tough on lefties. But when it comes to the righties, he gives up a 318 WOBA, 198 ISO. So I think he's a pretty solid option here. He's pretty cheap at 4,000, and I don't mind him as a one-off in your lineups because I'm not really looking to stack the Padres, but I don't hate Machado as a one-off at third base, especially at 4K versus a lefty. Then Matt Carpenter, 3,600. He's going to get a matchup versus Joe Musgrove, who does struggle versus lefties. He's actually pretty decent versus righties, but when it comes to the lefties, he's just struggled versus them. If we go take a look at Musgrove's splits here. So he's giving up a 219 ISO versus lefties, only an 18.9% strikeout rate versus lefties. Now, if you go to the righties, he's only allowing a 149 ISO versus them and a near 25% strikeout rate. So if you're playing anyone against Musgrove, I prefer the lefties, and I do think Matt Carpenter is a pretty good option at only 3,600. And going to shortstop, we have Francisco Lindor at 5K. Now, again, I do prefer him versus righties, where he's better on that side of the plate, from the left side of the plate, I should say. But still, I like the Indians here. They're one of the top stacks of the night, so I wouldn't want to fade Lindor in any Indian stacks. Now, he is better versus righties, as you can see, a 263 ISO versus them, 359 WOBA, 121 WRC+. Numbers do fall off a little bit here versus lefties, but it's still one of my favorite stacks of the night, so I do like Francisco Lindor. Xander Bogaerts, he should be hitting cleanup here, and again, I like the Red Sox quite a bit. It's just hard to get away from playing Red Sox on this slate. Now, he is pretty expensive, so he's not the best value option, but his numbers versus lefties are actually pretty good. He's got a 261 ISO versus them, 130 WRC plus, above 500 slugging. I think he's fine. He's not like my favorite point per dollar option, but if you're stacking the Red Sox, it's kind of hard to skip him, especially if he's going to be batting fourth. Going down to Corey Seager, he's 4,100. And again, anytime the Dodgers are facing a righty, I have tons of interest in the lefties because they just hit righties so well. And Corey Seager, he had a decent night last night, and going up against a guy that struggles versus lefties and Jeff Samardzija. If you're looking at Seager's numbers versus righties last year, he had a 126 WRC plus versus them, a 367 WOBA, 239 ISO. If you want to save some dough off of guys like Lindor and Bogarts, I think Corey Seager is a really fine option at 4,100. And if you want a cheap option, you can also look at Jose Peraza, who is second base and shortstop eligible. Going down to the outfield, which there's a lot of fun plays in the outfield, so you have a lot of decisions to make. But Cody Bellinger up top at 5,300. You got guys like Yelich, Trout, they're always fine. You can always play them. But they're just a little expensive for me, and they're not my most favorite spots in the world. So I think spending down a little bit at outfield is what I'm planning to do. And one of the best options on the slate is 4,800. We'll talk about him soon. But Cody Bellinger going up against a righty. Bellinger's numbers versus righties are just absolutely insane. If we look at his, he's great versus lefties too, but his numbers versus righties, you're going to see dark shades of green anywhere you look. 328 ISO, 423 WOBA, 416 on base percentage, 167 WRC plus, which is insane, 645 slugging. Cody Bellinger is an awesome play, and I don't think too many people are going to look his way just because everyone's playing JD Martinez. I think people are going to be spending up at pitcher a little bit. So I'm not really sure Bellinger is going to be that high on the slate. So if you're stacking Dodgers, you might get decent ownership on Bellinger. But, man, his numbers just are outstanding. Jeff Samardzija struggles versus left-handed bats. I mean, I could easily see him going deep here. So I do like Cody Bellinger. But my favorite play in the entire slate is JD Martinez. He's 4,800, and the guy is just an absolute animal versus left-handed pitching. If you're looking at his numbers, he's got a 482 ISO versus lefties. 482. He's just one of the best lefty smashers in the entire league. He's got 539 WOBA, 494 on base percentage, 242 WRC plus. 242 WRC plus versus left-handed pitching. These numbers are just insane. He's got a near 1,000 slugging versus them, over a 400 average. I mean, I just love JD Martinez here. I'm surprised he's not the most expensive player in the entire slate. So definitely like JD here. I think he makes too much sense. And for those of you who are fans of BVP, JD Martinez is 6 for 18 off of Tommy Malone with 2 home runs in his career. So he's even got the BVP working for him. So he just makes a lot of sense. Definitely like JD Martinez. Joey Gallo, I said I like the lefties versus Marquez, and Joey Gallo's definitely got some of the biggest power in the entire league. The guy can just absolute moonshot baseballs. Now, Gallo's numbers were actually better versus lefties last season, so he's a little bit reverse splitsies, but I definitely like the lefties better versus Marquez. And Gallo's numbers versus righties are still fantastic. I mean, numbers versus lefties are better. He's got over a 400 ISO versus them, but still, he's got over a 300 ISO versus righties, 371 WOBA, 124 WRC plus, very low ground ball rate, putting the ball in the air. So Joey Gallo, I think he's an excellent option. He's only 4,400, and again, Marquez struggles with lefties. Now with the lefties versus them, and Gallo always has a good chance of going deep any slate. So I do like Gallo. Franmil Reyes, he should be hitting in the heart of the order for the Indians, and I mean he's pretty cheap at 4,400. They're one of my favorite stacks on the slate. I like Reyes. You're getting a decent price on him, and righty on lefty matchup. Now Reyes is pretty good versus righties. He actually has more power versus them with a 271 ISO versus righties compared to 240 ISO versus lefties. But still, 240 ISO is still pretty good. 126 WRC plus, over a 500 slugging. So I think Reyes is still a good option. But Jordan Luplow, he is going to be hitting lower in the order than he did last year. Last year versus lefties, we saw him hit 4th sometimes. Sometimes we saw him hit 5th. Now he's down to 7th projected, but he was one of the best hitters versus lefties last season. Like, if you're looking at his numbers, the plate appearances aren't as much as guys like Joey Gallo or JD Martinez, but his numbers were very, very good. He had a 422 ISO versus left-handed pitching last season, 474 WOBA, 198 WRC plus, over a 700 slugging, had a 16% walk rate. Luplow was a guy I played a lot versus lefties last season. Like, he had excellent numbers. And again, if I'm stacking the Indians, Jordan Luplow at 4,200 I think is a very, very good option, and I don't mind using him whatsoever. Going down to Michael Brantley. If you guys last year were watching my videos, which a lot of people didn't watch my videos last year because I didn't have many, maybe like a couple of hundred. Michael Brantley was a guy I said anytime he's below 4K versus a pretty below average pitcher or just an average pitcher in general, he makes the spreadsheet. That's just rule of law here, and I had to stay true to that. Michael Brantley is on the spreadsheet. Now, he's going up against a lefty, which I much prefer him versus righties. His numbers versus righties are very good, but I do like the Astros stack here, and I wouldn't want to skip Michael Brantley because, I mean, at some point I think he's going to be fine, even if he doesn't do that great versus the lefty Marco Gonzalez. At some point he should see a righty, but Marco Gonzalez actually does have a little bit of reverse splits versus lefties where he's actually giving up more power versus them with a 176 ISO and a 343 WOBA and only a 13% strikeout rate versus lefties. And Michael Brantley's not a guy who strikes out really at all. He only has a 14% strikeout rate versus lefties and only an 8% strikeout versus righties. So even though it's a lefty-on-lefty matchup, I think that's just going to lower his ownership, and he's going to be hitting right in the middle of that order for the Astros. So I do like Michael Brantley. I know it's a lefty-on-lefty matchup, and I do prefer him versus righties, but we're getting him at 4K, and he's one of the more solid players in the entire league, and he's always putting the ball in play. A very low strikeout rate, and that's what I like out of my guys, low strikeout rate. So don't mind Brantley. And Andrew Benintendi, he's 3,800 now. It's the lefty-on-lefty matchup, which I'm not that big of a fan of. But if you're stacking the Red Sox, I'm not sure why you'd want to leave off the leadoff hitter because at some point he's going to see a righty, and he can still hit lefties. It's not like he just can't hit them. He's still got a 169 ISO versus them, 107 WRC+. I mean, not the best numbers in the world, but they're not the worst either. So if you're stacking Red Sox, I don't want to leave off Benintendi. I think he's still a pretty good option. I love that price tag you're getting on him as well. But yeah, I think that's pretty much all I want to talk about. A little bit longer video than yesterday, but there's 11 games, 9 more games than yesterday, so just a little bit more of a player pool. But I think that's going to be it, guys. So I do appreciate everyone watching. Sorry if this was a little bit choppy. We're still getting the flow of MLB, so I'm still in NASCAR mode. But as the season progresses, we'll get a better flow for this, and it'll just be a little bit better. But I do appreciate everyone watching. If you guys want to follow me on Twitter, feel free to do so. If you want to support my content over on Patreon, also feel free to do that. Remember to leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you guys in the next video.